Okay, all right, I guess it's time to go. Hello, it's so good to see so many of you that I know, and many of you that I don't know. And some who know me on Facebook, and now they're like, oh, that's her. Yeah, this is me. First of all, thank you to the host for having this event today. I'm learning a lot, so hopefully you'll learn something from it too. I love the name, Liberty Trumps Socialism Summit. Doesn't that just say everything? Doesn't that just say everything? What a great statement to start out with. So Diane gave you my background. I am on my own now. I'm no longer with Cornerstone. Oh, thank you. Thank you. We parted ways, but it's all good. Great organization. And I do go around and I have lobbied on behalf of parental rights, academic excellence, and literacy in New Hampshire for over a decade. So I'm going to just quickly start out with what's going on in New Hampshire. I tend to, when I speak at audiences, I tend to tell them what's going on in education right now, because you'll see a lot of problems, but you don't sometimes understand where they're coming from and how they got there. So everybody pretty much, I think, knows now that Common Core is a complete and total disaster, correct? I mean, everybody knows that. And so in 2010, the State Board of Education voted to adopt Common Core in New Hampshire, and back then nobody knew about it. And I started going out to all these organizations and telling people, we got a problem. And so when I talk to you today, I'm going to enlighten you about some of the other problems that are coming into public schools. And keep in mind that Common Core was never about a set of lousy math and English standards. Yes, they are lousy, and they're still in our schools in New Hampshire, by the way. It was really about redesigning public education. If you go back to an Obama speech, you will hear him say, I am here basically to redesign public education. So what does that mean? Because he didn't really explain it at the State of the Union address. What it means is he, at that time, and we've tried this before with School to Work years ago, is there is an effort, and it's coming, and it's happening, to change the public schools from a liberal arts model to a workforce development model. Some of you may be familiar with this in Europe. That is the focus. So you dumb down the standards because the goal is really not to elevate public education, is to really get the workers in. If you have a controlled society, you have to control the human capital, and now our kids are referred to as human capital. So I just want to make that clear about where we are heading. We're seeing it already in the legislature. We're seeing bills come through focused on workforce development. And I want to make it clear that I'm not certainly against my kids or your kids getting a good job after high school or college, but when this comes down from federal government, and let me even go a step higher, the United Nations, then we all need to be concerned about that, especially when it's going to take away freedoms and liberty. Because if the state is saying, here's the jobs, we need this many children going to those jobs, then they're going to be funneled into that. In the state of Texas, 8th graders have to choose their career path. And I normally get, ooh, what? That's crazy. But it's happening. And it's happening in this state through some of the legislation that I'm seeing. So I just want you to be clear about that. Not only do we have Common Core in the schools, we have next generation science standards that are worse than Common Core, because Common Core affects math and English. And I'm going to get off this subject real soon, but the next generation science standards, there's so much political bias, they're so dumbed down that if you want your kids to go into the scientific field, this is not going to prepare them. There's science appreciation standards. You can imagine the political bias in climate change, global warming inside the science standards. There's an attack on personal property rights in our science standards. And nobody seems to be wanting to do much about that. We've got to we've got to be vocal that this is unacceptable. Currently, the New Hampshire Department of Education is working on history standards. So they're revising the history standards that are currently in place and have been in place for many years, and they're lousy. you better hope, you better pray, and you better get involved to make sure that these are of quality when they are released. So I'm going to ask every person in this room who lives in New Hampshire, when they are released in draft form, to go through them, highlight any problems with them, and go to the State Board of Education and demand better standards, if that's what we are given. I have not seen them, I know they're in draft form, I know that they are working on them. So I just want to make it clear that if you really care about this move towards socialism, how do you think we get there? Why do you think these people are uprising? Why do you think we have these protests out there? Our kids are being trained in the schools. They're no longer teaching the fundamentals, the basics. So we can have an impact. We still have that power. But you have to make sure that you're exercising that power. So please, when they are released, if you're not following me on Facebook, send me a friend request. Believe me, once they are released, I will be publicizing that to everybody, and I'm going to need your help, especially if you have any historical background. Where's Dan Itza? He's left the room. He's one of the people I really want going through this with a fine-tooth comb, and everybody else, and really looking at. Some of the states get they call us a democracy. We need to make sure the language is correct. So thank you for that. Okay, so I think I'm going to ask you just a quick question. Does anybody in this room know who their school board members are? Oh, I love this. That's a pretty good amount of people. They hold so much power. You have no idea how much power they hold in their hands. And we're not exercising that. We're not running for school board. Okay, we have some exceptions in the room, Ralph. But this is a position that we can really affect positive change in our public schools. So we need to get out there, we need to run for school board, we need to figure out who's on our school board, we need to start communicating with them. I lived for 15 years in Bedford, I just moved to Hampton a year ago. I lived for 15 years in Hampton. My kids never attended the Hampton or Bedford schools, and my school board members heard from me probably weekly for 15 years. 15 years. If I showed you my tax bill, you would know why I demanded to be heard. Luckily, they were very courteous and were kind to me. So that's the other thing is this is what I think so many conservatives are missing out on. Really, where the power lies. And so I can remember years ago there was a Christian leader, and I'm not sure who it was. It might have been James Thompson. Somebody who said, "Get your kids out of the public schools. Get your kids out." I'm here to tell you that I think every parent should do what's best for their kids, but the mistake was that everybody walked away from them and let them do whatever they wanted to do. Now go look at your tax bill. Go look at how much you're paying to that school every single year. And have you voiced any opinions on what they're teaching? Have you looked at any of the curriculum? Because when I lived in Bedford, what I saw sometimes was absolutely horrible. And we stood up. Somebody mentioned Marxism, the Marxist movement. Well, in Bedford, we found out that the personal finance class was assigning a book called Nickel and Dime, Why You Can't Make It in America on Minimum Wage. And we had Fox News out, we had a whole bunch of people in an uprise because we're thinking, this is not personal finance, that is a discipline. And bringing in a socialist's indoctrinating book in our personal finance class was not acceptable. And was it a challenge? Because we had actually some people show up and was thrilled that that was in the classroom. We had students who were thrilled that their class was being dumbed down this way. But we fought and we won that battle. And you win those battles by speaking up and making sure you know what's going on. I would watch the school board meetings, and one of the 8th grade coordinators in Bedford said something about, our kids are being taught that the Constitution is a living document. So I immediately went through all of my information and explained to the superintendent and to the school board why that is not true. He tried to tell us, well, in terms of amending the Constitution. Well, if you change the language, That's a problem. So I was like, no, you're not going to call it a living document. That's not true. And I gave the evidence as to why. I went back and found the historical evidence as to why that's not true. So I encourage you to do that. Like I said, I can't remember this stuff off the top of my head like everybody else can, so I've got some notes. As I said, we're shifting from the liberal arts to the workforce training. And again, okay, thank you. And again, nothing wrong with kids getting out of school and being able to qualify for a job. But keep in mind that there was a from the G20 summit, U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, signed the UN Globalist Education Agenda. This is where this is all coming from. This is not organic. This is not something that, your school decides to start a VOTEC school and you're controlling it at the local level. This is now a top-down agenda on our schools. And if you think it's going to be, if you think you're going to have a voice, you're not, because state laws are already starting to change when it comes to the CTE and workforce development programs. And if you read those suggested proposed legislation, it talks about the needs of businesses versus the needs of students. That's a big change that's going on, and it's something I want to make you aware of. The humanities are still important. Geography, economics, world history, these are the things that C.S. Lewis talked about, why we need to be very careful shifting our education model to the workforce development model. The kids still need to read the founding documents. They need to know what federalism is versus federal control. That's what's going on with these CTE programs right now. We had schools very organically doing this, and now we have state legislation, which is really coming from federal laws, coming through the state. So they are going to start controlling those. They're going to start regulating those. We are dabbling, oh boy, 2 minutes. Okay, so we're also dabbling in mental health in our schools. It's called social emotional learning. And I wanted to touch on that very briefly, because if you think your schools are doing great teaching the reading and writing, just wait till they start treating your kids' mental health. Do you honestly think that our teachers and our schools are going to do this well? Again, this is coming from the federal government. ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, signed by President Obama. Bipartisan legislation. Who voted for that in New Hampshire? Senator Jean Shaheen. Senator Kelly Ayotte.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, big disappointment. I tried to contact her office many times and talk to her about this. Annie Custer. Frank Ginsa voted against it. He voted against it. It's 1,00061 pages, and how long is the U.S. Constitution? How many pages is that?
Somebody had it.
Yes. 17, okay. 4, okay. It's not 1,061 pages of federal law in our schools. That federal law gave the U.S. Secretary of Education unprecedented power. She now gets to approve state plans. So if you see a state plan, what do you think they're going to put in a state plan to get approval to keep the federal dollars coming? Everything that the federal government wants. And what does the federal government do? They go to the UN to figure out how to run our schools. So everything you see coming through the state now, in terms of grants, in terms of legislation, is being, because the progressives who brought this about knew that they'd never get this done if they did it from the federal government. They had to work through the states. That's the facade that exists now. So we have mental health now going on in the schools. And believe me, I think mental health is a critical issue. But when you put this burden on a school and you put this burden on a teacher who does not have the qualification, because I'm already hearing from teachers in New Hampshire saying, what is this? I am not qualified to do this. I am judging your kids in the classroom on their behavior. It's going into a data bank. I don't know where that information is going, and I don't want my kids involved in this. And yet we've got federal grants coming in, and this is what's controlling that. I think that's about it. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things real quick. We also get outside grants. Nellie Mae is a grant organization that has given grants to New Hampshire. Nellie Mae has a specific brochure that talks about how their main focus is community organizing. So you gotta look at the money coming in and start saying no to the money. We had an example of a girl wearing a Trump shirt in Epping. Let me tell you something, if you live in Epping, you need to be at that school board meeting. They just set you up, thank you, they just set you up for a lawsuit. She's gonna win if she sues. I mean, I have no doubt she's gonna win. You can't do that. There's many cases where students have won. And then finally, I just want to say that Barb, the other speaker, I'm just a big pro-lifer, so I'm just going to plug this real quick. She brought up the late-term abortion and infanticide, and I think it's really exposed the evil that exists in this country and the evil that exists amongst people who are willing to support that. It is time to identify evil instead of voting for it. Okay, so I just want to leave you with that, and I want to thank you again for having me, and I'm more than happy to answer questions if you have any questions on what's going on in your school or anything else. Thanks.